You wake up in the same room, same silence. Nobody calls your name. Nobody asks how your day went. The world doesn't care, and you know it not because you read it in some self-help book, but because you felt it in your bones, in your stomach, in the cold of dawn, when only the sound of the ceiling fan reminds you that time has stopped. Sound familiar? Here's what nobody told you about that feeling, that crushing weight of being invisible in a world full of noise. There is a character who embodies this exact experience so perfectly that millions of people can't stop thinking about him, analyzing him, becoming obsessed with his journey from nobody to God. His name is Light Yagami, and if you've ever felt truly alone, truly unseen, then you already understand why he's become the most searched anime character of our time. But this isn't about anime. This is about something much darker, much more real. 3 nights ago, I was scrolling through forums at AM. Don't judge. We've all been there, and I stumbled across something that made me sit up straight. Hundreds of comments, thousands of upvotes, all saying the same thing: Light Yagami gets it. He understands what it's like to be surrounded by idiots who don't see your worth. That's when it hit me. Light Yagami isn't just a character, he's a mirror. And what he reflects back at lonely, overlooked men is both fascinating and terrifying. Because here's the truth nobody wants to admit: every man who's ever felt invisible has, at some point, fantasized about having the power Light discovered in that Death Note. The power to matter. The power to be feared instead of ignored. The power to remake the world according to your vision. But before we dive into why Light Yagami has become the unofficial patron saint of solitary men, let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus worked IT at a mid-sized company for 7 years. Invisible Marcus, the guy who fixed everyone's computer problems but never got invited to the office happy hours. The guy whose ideas got stolen in meetings, whose presence barely registered in conference rooms full of louder, more confident voices. Marcus discovered Death Note during a particularly brutal week when his promotion got handed to someone with half his qualifications, but twice his social connections. He binged all 37 episodes in 3 days. For the first time in my life, Marcus told me in a DM that turned into a 2-hour conversation, I saw someone who understood that being smart isn't enough. Being right isn't enough. The world only respects power. That's the hook that catches every lonely man who discovers Light Yagami's story. Not the supernatural elements, not the cat and mouse game with L, but that moment when an overlooked teenager picks up a notebook and realizes he doesn't have to be invisible anymore. But here's where it gets interesting, and where most people miss the point entirely. Light Yagami's real power isn't the Death Note. It is his mastery of the 3 principles that every strategic mind throughout history has used to rise from nothing to everything. Principles that work in boardrooms, in relationships, in every arena where power matters. And these aren't the fake motivational mantras you see on social media. These are cold, tested strategies that separate the wolves from the sheep. The first principle is something Light demonstrates from episode 1. But most viewers completely miss it because they're focused on the supernatural spectacle. It's the reason why he becomes Kira, the reason why he stays undetected for so long, the reason why even L struggles to catch him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the moment that changes everything, not for Light, but for every man watching who recognizes himself in that story. Picture this: you're 17 years old, top of your class, perfect grades, model student, and absolutely nobody sees you as a threat. Nobody expects greatness from you. You're just there, background noise in other people's stories. Then one day, you find something that changes everything. Not magic, not a Death Note, but knowledge, understanding, a way of seeing the world that cuts through all the noise and reveals how power really works. This is where Light Yagami becomes more than entertainment. He becomes a case study in transformation from invisible to inevitable. The first principle Light masters is what I call strategic invisibility. While everyone else is fighting for attention, demanding recognition, posting their every thought on social media, Light understands something profound: true power operates in shadows. Think about it. How many times have you seen the loudest person in the room get outmaneuvered by the quiet one who was watching, learning, planning? Light doesn't announce his intentions. He doesn't demand respect. He earns fear through results, not words. But here's what's brilliant and terrifying about Light's approach. He maintains his mask perfectly. To the world, he's still just a brilliant student, helpful, polite, unremarkable. Nobody suspects that behind those calm eyes is a mind that's reshaping global politics. This is the fantasy every overlooked man understands. What if they knew? What if all those people who dismissed you, ignored you, talked over you in meetings, could see what you're really capable of? But the second principle is where Light separates himself from every other power fantasy character you have ever seen. It's also where the story gets uncomfortable, because this principle forces you to look at yourself in ways you might not like. Light masters emotional detachment. He doesn't get angry when people disrespect him. He doesn't argue with fools. He doesn't waste energy trying to convince anyone of anything. He simply observes, calculates, plans. Remember the scene where his classmates are discussing Kira's actions? Light sits there, listening to them debate his alter ego, and his face reveals nothing. No pride, no anger, no need to defend his position. He's completely detached from their approval or disapproval. This hits different when you're someone who's spent years caring too much about what others think, trying too hard to be understood, exhausting yourself in pursuit of validation that never comes. Light shows you what it looks like to not need that validation. To be complete within yourself, to derive your sense of worth from your own judgment, not from the opinions of people you don't even respect. But this detachment comes with a price, and this is where the third principle emerges, the one that makes Light Yagami both inspiring and cautionary. The third principle is strategic patience. Light doesn't act on emotion. He doesn't seek immediate gratification. He plays a game measured in years, not days. Every move calculated, every risk assessed, every sacrifice accepted as part of a larger design. This is where most people fail in real life. They want the power without the patience. They want the results without the process. They want to matter right now, immediately, without understanding that true influence is built brick by brick, decision by decision, over time. Light spends months establishing patterns, building his reputation as Kira, creating systems that will operate without him. He's not just using power, he's architecting a new world order. And here is the uncomfortable truth that makes Light Yagami so compelling to men who feel powerless. He succeeds. For most of the series, he wins. He outsmarts the greatest detective in the world. He builds a global movement. He becomes exactly what he set out to become, a god in the shadows, feared and obeyed by millions who don't even know his name. The loneliness doesn't break him, it forges him. But in here is where the story reveals its deepest wisdom. Light's ultimate downfall comes not from external enemies, but from the corruption of his own principles. He becomes everything he initially despised: arrogant, reckless, dependent on others' fear rather than their ignorance of his power. This is the real lesson hidden in Light Yagami's arc. Power without wisdom destroys itself. Intelligence without humility breeds its own downfall. The very isolation that made him strong eventually makes him blind to his own weaknesses. So what does this mean for you? Sitting there recognizing yourself in this analysis? Light Yagami represents both the promise and the peril of the solitary path. He shows you what's possible when you stop seeking approval and start building competence. When you stop explaining yourself and start demonstrating results. When you transform loneliness from a burden into a laboratory. But he also warns you about the seductive nature of contempt, the danger of viewing others as obstacles rather than fellow travelers in a difficult world. The real question isn't whether you relate to Light Yagami. If you've read this far, you already do. The question is, what are you going to do with that recognition? Because here is the final truth that separates Light Yagami from every other power fantasy. His story doesn't end with him becoming a better person. It ends with him becoming exactly what he chose to become: powerful, feared, and ultimately alone. The notebook was never the real power. The real power was always the choice to transform pain into purpose, invisibility into influence, solitude into strength. The question is, what kind of god do you choose to become?